even though I still do the weekly radio show, you still hear plenty of my voice, but I haven't really talked about what I make of this whole cultural cauldron of insanity, really, that I wouldn't say has culminated, because I don't think we've reached the culmination, but so far has culminated in the presidency of Donald Trump and some really outrageous, over the top, just, I'm sorry, crazy responses from the left. I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I don't think he's all there, really. I don't think that he's a whole human being. I think he is defective in some important way. And, not only should he not be the president of the United States, well, I won't go on with that thought. I will just say, not sure who said it. Maybe it was Doug Lane. I've been talking to Doug Lane a lot recently. That the left has never been more important than it is right now, and seemingly it has never been more dysfunctional and incoherent. Based on the responses, the attempts to resist the transformation of the country into Donald Trump's image, I think we're in for 8 years. I think that the Democrats, but more importantly, just socially liberal people, particularly online, are doing everything wrong. Everything wrong. I think we are getting 8 years of Trump. I hope not. Goodness, I hope not. But it seems that that's where we're going. And largely, I blame Facebook. I mean, I'm sure Twitter and Reddit and Tumblr and, I don't know, all the others have the same effect, but I mostly see it on Facebook. I think Facebook is driving people insane. I think it's literally driving them insane. I think that the picture of the world that you get just by surrounding yourself with people who agree with you, and you amplify one another's sentiments, you amplify one another's, reinforce and justify and amplify unhelpful emotional responses and unhelpful levels of just pessimism and doom. I know, absurd coming from me, right? I couldn't tell you. I have a new phone. I mean, it's not a new model, but it's new to me. Got it off eBay for like $130, and it is an amazing upgrade from what I had before. And I'm very grateful to my friend Marty, who gave me the phone that this new one replaced. But it's great. And I've got the Facebook app installed on it. I could not tell you how many times a day Facebook chimes and reaches out to grab my attention, and how many times I give it my attention. I just don't know. It's not an outrageous number. I'm sure I would be insulting many of you if I did count it up and tell you, well, how many times I was interacting with Facebook and how awful I thought it was, because it might be a tiny fraction of the number of times that you interact with Facebook on a daily basis. But it just seems that people are growing more isolated, more fanatical, more ideological in the worst possible way, less willing to even treat people they disagree with as people. I know I've said this before, but online, in the echo chamber of Facebook and similar services, we tend to cast the people that we're arguing with as the embodiment of evil, of the embodiment of everything we hate about some imaginary character that we have created and projected into the role of the person we're arguing with. Leonard Shlain wrote a book many years ago called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. And his idea was that when a culture gains mass literacy for the first time, when people who had been illiterate become literate, they go insane. They literally go insane, and they go on a violent spree. And I think that there might be something similar at work with the level of interconnectedness that we now experience. We're not used to it. We don't know how to deal with it. We don't know how to compensate for the crippling psychological effects that it is having or seems to be having on us. And we just haven't worked out how we are going to incorporate it into our lives in a sane and workable way. And so we're in that initial insane stage. I'm not making a metaphor here. I don't think I'm being hyperbolic. I think Facebook drives people insane, and the more time you spend on it, the more insane you become. So listen to podcasts. That's not a self-serving message, is it? And now I'm going to harken back to the most recent episode of the C-ROM podcast, where I ended it with a little rant about how Facebook is driving us crazy. Several people responded to that or posted things about it on Facebook, and people generally liked it. But looking back on it, I didn't like it so much because I didn't really say how or why Facebook is making us crazy, just that it is. So I wrote a little essay to follow up on that. I posted it to my LiveJournal, kmo.livejournal.com. So this is the post from February 26th, the day before yesterday. I wrote, "In recent conversations, I've been returning to the idea that Facebook and social media generally are driving us insane. Social media and Facebook in particular are certainly useful. I went to my 30-year high school reunion last year, and Facebook played a major role in shaping that gathering. The Friends of the C-ROM group on Facebook puts me in touch with listeners to the C-ROM podcast, and probably more importantly, puts listeners in touch with one another. That notion, that C-ROM listeners can be, quote, in touch, close quote, with one another via the medium of Facebook hints, in part at least, how social media makes us crazy. We can't touch one another on Facebook, though we can have conversations. We are social primates adapted to band together for mutual protection and to help one another make a living, which is to say to meet our basic survival needs as well as our need for intimate contact with lovers, parents, children, friends, and rivals. Even when we are not physically touching one another, being in close proximity to the people we know and depend on has a strong physical component. Our empathic brain circuitry prompts us to project ourselves into the skin of the members of our tribe. Based on their posture, their facial expressions, their gait, and even their smell, we can not only determine their mood and disposition, but we have a pretty good idea of what they're feeling. This is not an intellectual capacity. It's something we feel, and this sort of familiarity and proximity counts as being in touch, in a way that being able to share text, images, and hyperlinks does not. Dunbar's number is the number of people that we, as social primates, can maintain stable relations with. I think of this as the number of people we can know as people. I have, at present, 2,097 friends on Facebook. Obviously, most of them are not friends in any meaningful sense. I don't know how many of them I've actually met face-to-face, how many are friends of friends or acquaintances of acquaintances, or how many are just people that know of my existence through the podcast. There is a continuum between Facebook friends that I have a real sense of and those who are complete strangers to me. Some of those Facebook friends are people I've never met, but who I have spoken to over Skype. Having a voice to go with a name and whatever I can learn from someone based on what they write and post makes them more real to me than people I've never heard speak. When I meet an online acquaintance, even people I've interacted with online for years, they take a quantum leap toward being real people in my experience. Being a podcaster, there are many people who know my voice, who have listened to it for years, and who feel a familiarity with me that I don't feel with them. I found that when I meet such people face-to-face, even if I've only had minimal contact with them online, that their sense of familiarity is infectious. And very quickly I come to feel a much stronger connection to them than my very limited experience of them would suggest is possible. Some people I've never spoken to or met in person still occupy a category of familiarity beyond the level of mere acquaintance. The distance and disembodiment of online relationships can prompt a level of sharing that would require more trust and familiarity to match in face-to-face communication. This willingness to share and be vulnerable with people online seems to have withered away in recent years. But I don't know if online culture has changed or if it's just me. Maybe I've grown older and developed less need for the sorts of interactions that lead to that kind of openness in online communication. My Facebook friends occupy positions on a spectrum. At the near end of that spectrum are people I knew before there was such a thing as Facebook, and other people who would be important to me if the internet disappeared tomorrow. At the far end are people I don't know from Adam. In between lie people who I don't know as people, but who are not complete strangers. This portion of the spectrum is a spectrum unto itself, with people at the closer end seeming like real people compared to those at the far end, who are just an iota away from being complete non-entities. These are the people with whom I am most likely to get into dysfunctional exchanges. Most of what I know about these token people is how their opinion differs from mine. They become the embodiments of opinions that I see as flawed, which turns them into essentially flawed beings. Of course, the people I know in real life are flawed, but the kinship mechanisms instilled in us by our evolutionary history keep me from seeing the real people around me primarily in terms of their flaws. Those mechanisms do not work in cyberspace. Not yet, anyway. I hope and suspect that human culture will evolve to overcome some of the most dysfunctional aspects of how we relate to one another online. Transhumanists may envision upgrades to our neocortex that will allow us to know hundreds or thousands of people as intimately as our prehistoric ancestors knew the 150 people with whom they lived and faced the challenges of making a living. Perhaps AI intermediaries will help us interface with distant humans and cooperate and learn from one another without getting hung up on our differences. But I'm betting on cultural adaptation playing the crucial role. Psychonauts and devotees of the late Terence McKenna will probably remind me that culture is not your friend. This is true. Culture doesn't care about any of us as individuals, and some of the compromises it demands of us strip the joy and spontaneous self-expression from life. But culture does allow us to live in nation-states, comprised of hundreds of millions of individuals, when our biology still wants to gravitate to groups of 150. And in response to that, Cloud Walking Owl posted the following to LiveJournal. He writes, "Social media is like fire. Good servant, bad master. I have two responses. I loathe social media. It eats my time that I would rather be spending doing something else. But it has two advantages. First, it allows me to interact with people that I would never get to meet otherwise. I work at a blue-collar job, even though I consider myself an intellectual. People are sorted by class in our society, and the guys who move the furniture and wipe up spills don't get invited to conferences or asked to write papers in journals, no matter how good their ideas. I once sent a letter to an economics journal, and the editor looked up my name and called me by phone and asked me to expand what I'd written into an essay. When he asked what I taught at university, I said that I was a security guard. An embarrassed silence ensued, followed by a suggestion that the letter could be edited and published in the letters section. This means that I spend a great deal of my life not knowing anyone, that I can discuss anything beyond sports scores and the size of women's breasts. Social media, like the C-ROM group on Facebook, offers at least something of a venue for intelligent conversation. This is not only just an issue of isolation and loneliness, it is also a question of mental limitation. I am of the opinion that no man is an island, and if someone is not allowed opportunities to discuss deep subjects, they progressively lose the ability to think these sorts of things, or at least do not develop as much as they could have. I believe that the dialectic of conversation is integral to human consciousness. Secondly, I foolishly believe that I have something to share with the world around me. I've written a blog for about 20 years, published an online magazine devoted to local news and affairs, and have self-published 2 philosophy books. The only way someone like me has any hope of marketing those sorts of things is to immerse myself in social media. So it has become something of a task I have to follow. Social media is a job, just like hoeing turnips, selling burgers, or mopping floors." And LiveJournal user Dode responded with the following. Subject line, "No horse." I really enjoyed the semi-rant from the end of episode 512 that covered this. I tend to agree that social media, or the way a lot of people are using it, is driving us nuts. Partly I blame how it has typically become reactive. Adopting an app or allowing your web browser to interrupt your activity creates an irritation or starts brain juices flowing that drive us away from thought and towards snarling. I noticed that earlier technologies like Usenet generally degraded as more people tended to always be online. In the days of dial-up and download, there was always time for thought and the possibility to edit a post before the next batch of messages were exchanged. Douglas Rushkoff seemed to be drifting in the same direction on his musings about social media and the impact of the great distractor. It might be worth trying to pick up this again with him. I'm trying to disengage at least with parts of social media and have disabled all messages, making time in the morning and evening to catch up with friends or acquaintances I value there. I'm also trying to get back into the habit of using LiveJournal, but it's been some time. I avoid sitting on anything with teeth, but have frequently listened to the podcast while rowing, both on and off the water. Before moving back to the UK, it was part of my commute, turning an hour of European motorway into something I looked forward to in the mornings. So I think the I avoid sitting on anything with teeth comment is a response to my question I ask if anybody ever listens to the Sea Realm podcast while riding a horse. All right, so if you would like me to read something that you have written, do send it to me via email or post it to the show notes for these episodes, or you can post them to the Friends of the Sea Realm or now to LiveJournal. Again, my LiveJournal is kmo.livejournal.com, and I try to post something there in the 500 to 1,000 word range every night. All right, well, that is all for this episode of the Sea Realm Vault podcast. As always, thank you very much for subscribing. I will talk to you again soon.